She walked through the restaurant doors every evening like clockwork, wearing her plain black uniform and tying her hair back neatly. To most people, she was just a waitress, someone who took orders, carried heavy trays, and smiled politely. At rich customers, the restaurant was one of the fanciest in the city, full of polished floors, glittering lights, and the soft clinking of expensive wine glasses. Every night people with suits and silk dresses came in to eat meals that cost more than she earned in a whole day. But while she worked quietly and never made a fuss, there was something about her eyes. They always looked like they were thinking about something far away, and the truth was, they were dot. At the corner of the restaurant, there was a grand piano, sat there like a decoration, shiny and perfect, though barely anyone played it anymore. A hired pianist used to perform during dinner service, but he had stopped coming weeks ago. No one had replaced him yet. Most customers didn't even notice, but she noticed. Every single night she glanced at that piano like it was calling to her. What no one knew was that she had once played piano every day. Her father taught her when she was a little girl. Back then, her hands were small, but her dreams were big. She wanted to perform on stage, to make people feel something with music. But then, life changed. Her father passed away. Her mother got sick. Bills piled up. Piano lessons were the first thing to go, followed by her dream. She took a job, then another, eventually landed here serving tables at a place where dreams didn't matter as much as keeping plates full and customers happy. She never told anyone about her past. She didn't think anyone would care. 2. The chefs. She was just someone who cleaned up broken glasses. To the manager, she was just another worker he could call in on short notice. To the customers, she barely existed, lest their food took too long. But that didn't stop her from dreaming, even a little. During her breaks, when the restaurant was quiet and empty, she sometimes walked up to the piano and ran her fingers along the keys. She never played it. She didn't want to get in trouble. Touching the keys made her feel alive again. Like the little girl who believed in music, one evening something felt different. The restaurant was preparing for a private event. Something big. Word spread that famous people were coming. Businessmen, celebrities, politicians. The staff rushed around, setting candles, polishing glasses, checking every corner twice. Everything had to be perfect. She helped without complaint, like always, but her heart felt heavy. She had worked there for 2 years and had never been noticed for anything other than being fast or quiet. That night, she didn't expect anything different. As the sun went down, luxury cars began to arrive. The guests walked in with confidence, laughing loudly, shaking hands. Everything about them said they were used to attention. They were used to being seen. She served them carefully, keeping her head down, trying not to spill anything. The piano sat in the corner, untouched, as always. The event had promised live music, but the usual pianist had called in sick last minute. No one knew what to do. The manager was panicking quietly, whispering into his phone. Walking in circles, she stood near the kitchen door, listening. Her heart started beating faster. A small voice inside her said, maybe, just maybe this was her moment, but she shook the thought away. Why would anyone want to hear a waitress play the piano? And yet her eyes stayed on that instrument, like it was waiting for her. The restaurant buzzed with noise and activity. Expensive perfume filled the air, and the sound of laughter from powerful people echoed off the walls. The private event had fully started now. Long tables were filled with beautifully arranged dishes and sparkling drinks. Everyone was dressed in fine clothes, talking about business deals, travel, and parties. The lights were dim, but the room sparkled with gold and crystal. The waitress moved quickly between tables, keeping her eyes on her work. But her heart wasn't in it. She kept glancing toward the piano in the corner. It still untouched. Still silent. Her fingers itched to touch the keys, to play something, anything. Then she heard the manager speaking behind her, sounding stressed. The piano player canceled. Can you believe it? Tonight of all nights? He whispered to one of the chefs near the kitchen. What now? The chef asked. I don't know. These people are expecting music. We promised a live performance, the manager replied, rubbing his forehead. He looked like he was about to explode. "Do we have a backup plan?" "No, nothing. We're stuck." She stood still for a second. Her heart beat faster. That quiet voice in her head got louder. Maybe she could help. Maybe she could play. Just for a little while. Just until someone else arrived. She had played before. She still remembered, but she was scared. What if she made a mistake? What if they laughed at her? I mean, these weren't just regular people. These were rich, powerful guests. People who didn't expect a waitress to do anything, more than refill their drinks. She looked down at the tray in her hands. It was shaking a little. Finally, she took a deep breath and walked toward the manager. "I heard about the piano player," she said softly. The manager looked at her, annoyed. "I can play," she said, trying. "To sound confident, if you want, I can step in." He raised his eyebrows. "You," she nodded slowly. "Yes, I've played before. I'm not a professional, but I can try." For a moment, the manager just stared. Then he looked back at the room full of guests, then at the empty piano, and finally back at her. "You're serious?" he asked. "Yes." Sighed. "Fine. One song. Just one. If they don't like it, you stop immediately. Understand?" "Oh." She nodded again, feeling her legs go weak. The manager walked to the center of the room and clapped, his hands gently to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "our pianist had an emergency and couldn't make it tonight. But one of our own staff members has offered to step in for a short performance. Please give her a moment." The room went quiet. Heads turned. Some looked curious, others confused. A few people laughed under their breath. A waitress playing. Piano. It sounded like a joke. She walked slowly to the piano, feeling 100 eyes on her. Her hands were cold. Her heart thumped so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and took one last deep breath. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. She closed her eyes and she began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost shy. A few people continued whispering at their tables. Then something changed. The notes grew stronger, fuller, deeper. Her fingers moved like they remembered everything, even after all these years. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Her heart led the way. The room began to fall silent. The whispers stopped, one by one. Heads turned back toward her. No one expected what they were about to hear. She kept her eyes closed as her fingers danced across the keys. The sounds that came from the piano were soft at first, like a quiet memory. But slowly, the music grew stronger, filling the entire restaurant. The room, once loud with talk and laughter, turned completely silent. One guest, holding a glass of wine, paused mid-sip. Another, who had been typing on his phone under the table, stopped and looked up. Even the servers at the back froze, trays in hand. Something was happening, something they hadn't expected. No one had thought much when they saw a waitress walking to the piano. Some even thought it was a mistake. But now, all those thoughts vanished. The music was too beautiful, too real. It wasn't just someone hitting keys. It felt like a story was being told, one without words, only emotions. Her hands moved with confidence. Each note came out clean and full of feeling. Some parts were gentle, like a soft breeze. Others were deep and full of sadness, like she was. Sharing pain that had been buried for years, she didn't need to see the keys. Her heart knew the way. One man leaned over to his wife and whispered, "She's not just playing, she's living it." At a table near the front, a well-dressed woman wiped her eyes without realizing it. The music reminded her of something she couldn't explain. Maybe it was a lost love, or a childhood memory. Whatever it was, it pulled at her heart. The chef peeked out from the kitchen window and called over the other staff. "Need to hear this," he said. Soon, almost everyone was standing still, listening. The only sound was the piano. She didn't know who was watching. She didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt free. The pressure of the job, the sadness at home, the long nights, everything faded. It was just her and the piano. Music spoke for her. It told the crowd everything she had never been able to say. The grand piano, which had sat silent for so long, now came alive under her touch. She poured every emotion she had into the performance. There were no fancy tricks or show-off moves. It was raw, honest, human. As the music reached its highest point, the notes soared, almost floating in the air. It felt like time had stopped. People didn't even blink. They just listened, like they were afraid to miss even a second. Then slowly the music began to fall like a soft rain. Her fingers moved gently now, closing the song with care. The last note stayed in the air for a few long seconds, hanging there like a goodbye. She lifted her hands from the keys and opened her eyes. For a moment, everything was still, no one moved. She looked around, suddenly nervous again. Maybe they didn't like it. Maybe she had made a mistake by stepping up. Then all at once, the room broke into loud applause. Clapping echoed through the hall. People stood up from their seats. Some cheered. Others simply smiled, their eyes full of something they hadn't felt in a long time. She sat frozen, not sure what to do. The manager stood at the back, stunned. Even he couldn't believe what had just happened. She had come to work that evening like always, wearing her plain black uniform and expecting nothing. But now something had changed. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, and she didn't even know it yet. But her life had just begun to take a very different path. She stood up slowly from the piano bench, her hands still trembling from the performance. Her heart was racing, and her face felt warm. The sound of clapping continued to fill the room. Some people stood and kept clapping, while others looked at her with surprised but kind eyes. A few even nodded in respect, as if they now saw her in a completely different way. She had never been the center of attention before. She didn't know what to do, so she gave a small, nervous smile and quietly stepped away from the piano. She passed the tables to go back toward the kitchen. Some guests leaned in and whispered things like, "She's amazing, and where did she learn to play like that?" One older man even stopped her as she passed by his chair and said softly, "Thank you for that." It touched my heart. She couldn't speak. She just nodded politely and walked on, still shocked. Back in the kitchen, the staff was waiting for her. Some of them had watched through the kitchen window. One of the servers grinned wide and said, "You didn't tell us you could do that?" Another one clapped her on the back. Even the chef, who was usually strict and serious, smiled and said, "That was real music. You've got something special." She didn't know how to react. Her hands still felt like they were holding the piano keys. Her mind was still filled with the sound of the song she had just played. It was like waking up from a beautiful dream. Later that night, after the event ended and the guests began to leave, something unexpected happened. A well-dressed man approached the manager and asked for her. The manager looked surprised but called her out from the back. She walked out slowly, still wearing her work apron. The man introduced himself politely and said he was a music producer. She blinked, not quite understanding at first. He explained that he had been sitting at one of the tables during her performance, and he had been moved by her music. Deeply moved. "I've seen a lot of talent over the years," he said, "but what you played tonight, it wasn't just talent. It was soul. You played from the heart, and people felt it." She didn't know what to say. She just stared at him quietly. Then he said something that made her eyes widen. "I recorded a part of your performance. Just a short clip. I hope you don't mind," he said. "I shared it online a few hours ago, and people are already reacting. I think they see what I saw." She felt a mix of emotions, shock, worry, and a small bit of hope she had never imagined. "Anyone outside that restaurant would hear her play? Would you be open to meeting at my studio?" he asked kindly. "No pressure, just to talk. I think you could do more with your music, if you want to." She nodded slowly, still in disbelief. When she went home that night, she told her mother everything. Her mother held her hands and smiled through tears. "Your father would have been so proud," she whispered. She couldn't sleep at all. The whole night played over and over in her head. The piano, the applause, the producer's words. She Checked the video online, and it was true. People were already sharing it, commenting things like, "Who is this girl?" And she plays like she's been through something real. She didn't understand what was happening. She had only played one song. She hadn't even planned it. But now the world seemed to be turning toward her. And for the first time in a long time, she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, her dream wasn't lost after all. She arrived at work the next day feeling nervous. Everything looked the same. Same tables, same lights, same uniforms. Had changed. She didn't know what to expect. Would people treat her differently now? Would the manager be upset about the attention? Or would everything go back to normal? As she stepped inside, a few of the kitchen staff clapped for her playfully. One of the older waiters gave her a proud look and said, "You made history last night." She smiled, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to people praising her. Most days, she was invisible. Now suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to her. Even some of the guests who returned that evening asked about her. A couple sitting near the window said they saw the video online. "You were incredible," the woman said. That moment felt like magic. She thanked them shyly and carried on with her duties, but her heart was full by the end of the shift. Her feet were tired as usual, but something exciting happened. Her phone buzzed with a message from the music producer. He thanked her again for her time and asked if she would like to visit his studio later that week. He said it would just be a simple meeting, no promises. Just a chance to talk and maybe hear her play more. She didn't reply right away. She sat on the bus ride home, staring out the window, thinking about what it all meant. Her life had always been simple. Work, home, worry, repeat. There had never been time or space for dreams. But now, a tiny door had opened. Later that night, she showed the message to her mother. Her mother looked at her with proud eyes and gently said, "I think you should go. Sometimes, chances only knock once." The next few days were strange. The video of her playing the piano kept spreading. People on social media were calling her the piano waitress. Some news websites had shared it too, calling it a beautiful surprise moment in a fancy restaurant. One article even said, "She played with such heart that you could feel her story in every note. She didn't like the attention much. She didn't care for fame. But a part of her felt happy that people connected with her music. Maybe others had also faced struggles. Maybe the feelings she poured into the piano had reached them in some small way. When the day of the studio visit finally came, she almost canceled. Her hands shook as she got ready. She wore the plainest clothes she had, not wanting to look like she was trying too hard. The building was modern and quiet. When she entered, the producer greeted her warmly and led her inside. The studio was filled with instruments, soft lighting, and shelves of equipment she didn't understand. But in the center was a piano, simple, beautiful, and waiting. "Would you like to play something?" he asked. She hesitated, then slowly sat down and let her fingers find their place on the keys. This time, she didn't play to prove anything. She just played how she felt. It's a soft tune, full of peace, wonder, and a bit of fear. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then the producer smiled. "You're not just talented," he said. "You're real, and that's rare." He offered her a small opportunity, scholarship at a nearby music school, a chance to learn more, to practice, to grow. He said he believed in her, and that if she wanted, he would help her get started. She didn't say yes right away, but something inside her whispered, "This is your chance." She stood outside the music school building, holding the letter in her hands. The scholarship was real. It had her name on it. It felt like a dream, but the paper was solid and the words were clear. All she had to do was accept it, step inside, and begin. But her legs didn't move. She had spent so many years working, taking care of things, putting her dreams aside, that now faced with the chance to chase one, it felt strange. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed in front of others who had been playing for years? The fear was loud, but she remembered her mother's voice from the night before. Even if it scares you, walk toward it. You've walked through harder things. She took a deep breath and stepped through the door. The school was nothing like the restaurant. The walls had pictures of famous musicians, The halls were filled with the soft sounds of violins, singing, and piano. Everyone there seemed busy, focused, and confident. She felt out of place at first. Her clothes were simple, and she didn't have fancy bags or instruments. But when she sat in front of the piano in her first class, something happened. Her hands knew where to go. Her heart settled. She didn't have to be like anyone else. She just had to be herself. Each day brought new challenges. She had to wake up early, attend lessons, and practice for hours. She worked part-time at a small coffee shop in the evenings to pay for rent and food. Life was still not easy, but it was full of purpose. The teachers noticed something in her. She didn't just follow notes on a page. She added feeling, emotion, and depth to everything she played. They could tell she had lived through things. She wasn't just playing music. She was telling her story through it. Sometimes other students asked where she had trained before. She would smile and say, in a restaurant during breaks. When no one was watching. Word slowly spread around the school about the girl from the restaurant. One teacher even invited her to join a student performance night. At first, she said no. She was scared. But later she changed her mind. She knew growth never came from hiding. On the night of the show, she stood backstage, dressed in a borrowed black dress. Her hands were cold again, just like the night she first played in the restaurant. She could hear the audience settling into their seats. When her turn came, she walked out quietly. No one clapped yet. They were waiting to hear her. She sat down at the piano. The lights above made everything else disappear. She took a breath and started to play. This time, she played a piece she had written herself. It had parts that were soft, like memories. Other parts were strong and bold, like the moment she had stepped up to the piano that first night. It told the story of a quiet girl who worked hard, stayed kind, kept her dream alive when no one else could see it. When the final note ended, the room stayed silent for a second. Then came the clapping. It wasn't loud and wild like the restaurant. Applause. It was warm, honest, real. She stood and bowed gently. The lights felt brighter, but so did her heart after the show. Her teacher walked up to her and said, "You were born to do this." She smiled and looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. Maybe she had been afraid before. Maybe she still was. But now, she knew she was finally walking toward something that belonged to her, and she wasn't going to stop. Months passed like pages turning in a book. Every day was filled with music, lessons, practice, and quiet determination. She wasn't the fastest learner, and she didn't always get everything right on the first try, but she never gave up. While she lacked in training, she made up for with heart. People around her began to notice. Her teachers praised her growth. Her classmates respected her journey. Some even came to her for help with their own pieces. Slowly, she was becoming known, not just as the girl who surprised a crowd once, but as a real musician, a person who had something deep to say through music. The producer who had discovered her stayed in touch. He visited the school now and then listened to her progress and reminded her to stay grounded. One day he brought her an offer. "There's a small concert coming up," he said. "A real stage, not just a school performance. I think you're ready." She felt her heart jump. She had dreamed about something like this, but now that it was real, fear tried to creep back in. Would she be able to stand on a big stage? She'll play in front of strangers again this time, not by surprise, but by invitation. She looked down at her fingers. They had carried her this far. They had told her story when she couldn't find the words. She smiled softly and said, "Yes, I'll do it." The weeks leading up to the concert were full of practice. She picked the perfect piece, something she had written from scratch, a song about the life she had lived, from late-night bus rides to quiet tears behind kitchen doors, from wiping tables to touching piano keys when no one was watching. When the night finally arrived, she stood backstage in a large concert hall. Lights glowing above her, chairs filling with people. Some of the guests were strangers. Some were music lovers. And sitting in the front row were two very familiar faces. Her mother and her former manager from the restaurant. The producer gave her a nod from the side of the stage. She stepped out. Under the lights, the audience gave polite applause. but most of them didn't know her story. Not yet. She sat down in front of the grand piano. Her heart beat fast, just like the first time. But this time, she welcomed it. She took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The hall filled with the sound of her soul. Every note had a meaning. Every pause carried weight. The song took the audience through a journey of hardship, of hope, of quiet strength. She wasn't showing off. She was simply being honest. This was her way of speaking. As the last note faded, the room stayed silent for a moment. Then came the clapping. Not just polite. Claps, real applause. Strong, long. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. She stood, gave a small bow, and looked toward the front row. Her mother had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. The old manager from the restaurant looked stunned again, just like the night she first played. After the concert, people came to meet her. Some said her music moved them. Others asked about her journey. Few didn't believe she had once been a waitress in a restaurant. But she simply smiled and said, "That piano was always there. I just needed the courage to touch it." In the days that followed, offers came in more performances, small recordings, and interviews. But she didn't rush. She took each step slowly, with care. Because now she knew success wasn't about being famous. It was about being brave enough to believe in your gift. Even when the world saw you as just a girl with a tray in her hand, and that belief had changed her life forever.